I don't think so.
Whoa, all right, hold on, let me pause this before we, we're being recorded. All right, we are going to go through the appraisal contingency because I literally get 19,000 questions a day on this. And I know that it is confusing. I hate the form. I don't write the form. So I would appreciate that when people call me and ask for questions, please don't yell at me. I didn't write it, okay? If it was up to me, we would have two different forms. One would be a waiver and one would be a contingency. But again, I can only do what the state gives me, okay? So before I get into it, just explaining it, what questions do we generally have on it? Like, what do you think is the most confusing? Because if it's the same question over and over, it's all going to be the same question. So go ahead.
I'm going to sum up probably half this class right now. So if the minimum value is not met that you put in the appraisal contingency, then that addendum is now null. And then it goes back to the mortgage contingency paragraph in the agreement section.
Done. Class over. Boom. Yes.
So make sure.
Yep. So to sum that up then, so one of the questions that I get often, which baffles me because it literally isn't bold, this is only for conventional mortgages or cash. VA and FHA is built into the agreement of sale, so you do not need to do it. And it literally says not to be used with FHA or VA. So reading 101 helps a lot. So then the appraised value of the property must be equal to or greater than the purchase price, or, so that is the minimum. So a lot of the questions that I get is like, my client's willing to cover $15,000 in appraisal, or my client's willing to cover, $50,000. Then it turns into a math problem for you. So if the purchase price is $350,000 and your client is willing to cover $50,000, then you need it to appraise for $300,000. So what you just deduct on what they're willing to cover. I will say, side note, just because you guys fill it out correctly doesn't mean the other side is going to understand it correctly. That is not our problem, but it's up to us to educate them. So what I usually say is, I have attached an appraisal contingency, must appraise for $300,000, blah, 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 blah. Write it in the email when you send it over to them. My client's willing to cover up to $50,000. So we only need to appraise up to $300,000. My client will, cover anything. Make it simple for them in the email. I was watching YouTube videos yesterday and of like 4 different other brokers teaching it. And there was like 4 different other explanations. And I was on the phone yesterday. So everything I teach you today is coming directly from PAR. I was on the phone with PAR for almost 40 minutes yesterday, explaining to them how I explain it and getting feedback to make sure that I was explaining it correctly. And I was like, oh, I saw a YouTube video of that. And she was like, I'm literally afraid to go on and watch these videos. I was like, yep, you should. So a lot of other people are being taught incorrectly. So you can just say, per PAR, this is how it is explained. And then let them call PAR if they have a problem. But how I'm teaching it today is how the state explains it and how it's intended to be used, okay? So if your client has an appraisal gap, that goes on, oh, I found one, but thank you. That goes on the top line, and then whatever the contingency period. So it automatically goes 30 days unless specified. The contingency period is how long it takes for the appraiser to actually go out to the property and how long it takes to get the report back. So make sure that if you don't think it's going to be done in 30 days, that you extend it ahead of time. There's never a problem until there's a problem. So I always say get all of your numbers up front when everyone's still happy and just first under, contract and there's no stress yet. Because if you're like, oh, it didn't appraise, we need to extend it, they're not going to extend it at that point. So if you don't hear from the appraiser within like 2 weeks, you may want to call and ask for an extension. There is no built-in extensions in this addendum, okay? Have that conversation up front with your bank or mortgage lender. All right, so we are going to skip down on 2. Do you select option A or do you select option B? I'm going to summarize and then I'm going to break it down a little bit further. So option 1 is an actual contingency. Option 2 is a waiver to a point. We will come back to that. So option 1 is if it doesn't appraise, so we're going to go back to the same 350, and if you say on that line and it appraises at 290, so if you had in there purchase price 350, your client's willing to cover 50,000, so you have on that line that it must appraise for a minimum of 300, but now the appraiser says 290. Now you have a 10,000 gap that your client's not willing to cover. So because it is outside of or below what you have on that line, your client has the right to terminate or renegotiate the contract. So this is the only option that gives them the right to terminate. Okay, so terminate or renegotiate. That works just like any other appraisal contingency that we've ever had. So that is the true one. Any questions on 1 or 2A so far? Okay, they're the easy ones. No one usually has questions with those. Now, option 2. It's written terribly, guys. I understand that. So option 2, a lot of people just think it's an automatic waiver and there's nothing that you can do. That is correct but incorrect at the same time. So if you leave the top blank, then you're not protecting your client if you put something in, if they initial option 2. So option 1, we're going to go back to that same scenario on if it is 350 purchase price and then it appraises for 290, but you put 300 on that line. If that happens, this is null and void. This piece of paper means nothing at that point because it's below the 300. It does not mean that they can use the appraisal contingency to get out of the contract. It just means that it reverts back to the mortgage contingency paragraph. So the mortgage contingency paragraph with the LTV and the loan amount basically means that if they are not able to make up the gap, then they can get a denial letter. Now, they can't just say like, oh, we're going to get a denial letter. It truly just means there is no way that they can purchase this house. So in the mortgage contingency, where this gets sticky is that with a mortgage contingency, only a seller can terminate on a mortgage contingency. However, it says that the buyer is going to continue to have or continue to make good faith effort. So that doesn't mean, oh, it did, 290, we're done. This means that we have exhausted every possibility with the other side to make it work. And if they can't restructure the loan or anything along those lines, then a denial letter will be issued, and then it's up to the seller to terminate. The seller is not going to keep dragging a buyer on that can't afford to buy the house and it appraised too low. But now let's go back to that 300 and that 290. The seller has the right to say, we will bring the price down to 300 because your client was willing to make up the gap 50,000 and they only have to eat 10,000. The seller with option B does not need to renegotiate the entire thing and bring it down to technically 290. There was only that 10,000. They're willing to eat that 10, but you still have the minimum appraised value at 300. But if they can't restructure the loan around any of that, like, so say, for example, they're willing to restructure the loan at like 300,000 and that's what you had in there for your minimum, then you can continue to go forward. But say you had in there purchase price of 350, minimum appraised value of 300, and it appraised at like 250, and the seller's like, I'm not willing to eat 50,000, and your client's like, I can't bring 100,000, and they can't restructure the loan, then you guys can get a denial letter, or the seller can then let you out of the contract. But the buyer has to continue good faith effort until the seller calls it quits. That's where it gets stuck. So you, as a listing agent, what you guys should know is whatever that minimum in there is, you only have to negotiate between the appraised value and the minimum with option 2. Same thing technically with option 1, but that's if it falls short.
Can you repeat that sentence?
So they only have to negotiate between, like, so my example was if it was 350 and you have on option 1 300,000, and then they selected option 2, which is technically a waiver, then the seller can say, like, okay, we'll come up, or we'll come down 10,000, or we'll come down to 300, or, you know, somewhere along those lines. But if you have nothing and leave that blank on the first line and say it must appraise for the purchase price, and then select option 2, if it doesn't appraise for the purchase price, you cannot then go back and say, we want to negotiate or we want to terminate. You cannot just terminate because of the appraisal contingency. It has to be something with the loan. So if they're putting 20% down and then all of a sudden they're not putting 20% down and now it knocks them out of their debt to income ratio and they truly can't buy, then that's a denial letter. But you can't just say, like, oh, they want to put 20% down, now they're not able to, but they still have all this gap in their debt to income ratio. They just don't want to do it. You have to make a good faith effort to get the house. What?
So then don't leave it blank.
You're better off putting their minimum in of what they can cover. Yes.
Let me go first.
Oh, that's okay.
Then you go first.
Okay, so if you were willing to pay any difference, which I've had before with this, and the agent and I couldn't agree on this form. I mean, I just put $0 because they're willing to pay
Everything?
everything.
So what I would suggest then is literally don't even put this form in there at all. If they're willing to cover any appraised gap. So a lot of the questions that I get is they're willing to cover any appraised gap, or they're willing to cover like 20,000 over appraised value, or they're willing to pay 20,000 over appraised value, which I hate, guys. Please don't write that shit. God. But I suggest, this is
But
why
if
I
you
don't
put not
take
to
it.
exceed
You
the purchase price, or not to exceed whatever their max
well,
is.
so
right?
you can put whatever their max on there if they're not willing to, but some people are like, they're willing to just, you know, go up. I always say if it's something that's like outside of cut and dry on this paper, write a side addendum and just say buyer is willing to completely waive the appraisal contingency, will not change the LTV, will not change the, you know, loan amount. The buyer is willing to cover any cost in the appraised value, like spell it out on a side addendum. But if your client is willing to cover any part or a short part of it, then only do, you know, I always say do option 1. Here's my other thing that drives me flipping nuts with this form, just life in general. And I heard it from a broker yesterday on one of the YouTube videos that I was watching that says, oh, well, your LTV and your appraisal or mortgage contingency is a built-in appraisal contingency. It's not. If you guys read the agreement of sale, only the seller can terminate from a mortgage contingency. So you have to get a denial letter. Most lenders, denial letters are generated from a system. So the lender is not just going to be like, yep, it doesn't work in the buyer's favor, so we're going to give a denial letter. It means that we've exhausted every option and now there's a denial letter. So it's not a built-in contingency. If your buyer cannot cover any part of the appraisal contingency, don't try to be slimy. Don't try to hide anything. Put the contingency with option 1. Show all of your cards. I always tell my clients, if you do not win an offer because we were straight up, it wasn't the house for you. If I have to do something slimy or try to get one over on the listing agent, it's not your house. Be straight up. If they can't afford it and they need an out, put option 1. I always tell my sellers, if this form's not there and there's an LTV in there, the agent's going to try to get around on us. There's a contingency. So spell it out. Be open with the other person. My client can only cover, 20,000, or my client can't cover anything. We need it to appraise for the purchase price, and then put the purchase price in there so it just doesn't look like that you skipped over it.
Can you put a TBD in the LTV on the agreement of sale based upon that? Because they're like, I have one now. They're waiving the appraisal. They're covering any gap, and the LTV we put TBD.
That you technically can. I would explain that to the other
Everyone
agent.
has different ways they want.
Everyone has different, and it really depends on. I've had two different.
That blank.
You can. I would leave
Wouldn't
it
it
blank
just be blank?
above anything, only because I've had people come back and with even like, do you know how buyer's choice for mortgage or to be
Yeah.
determined? You're not supposed to put that because to be determined and buyer's choice is not technically a mortgage company. So it's supposed to technically be a mortgage company, because say you decide to say their pre-approvals with like ABC lending, but then you put to be determined and then they truly don't get a mortgage and it was XYZ mortgage company that gave you a denial, they're not named in there. So where is this denial coming from? So I always say, if you're submitting an offer with ABC, put ABC on there. And then after that, you can always say, hey, my clients, we need to do an addendum. So with the to be determined, you could always leave it blank.
It's better to leave it blank.
Or yes, I would say leave it blank than to be determined, because someone may come back with some kind of gray area there, which they'll all try to find. But you can also, if they're willing to cover a gap, you can say 50%. Like if they're going to put 20% down, but they're willing to then put 50% there and show that they have the funds. But again, I think this form's terrible. I'm hoping that we see changes in it in the future.
And what do you do with this form? Because this is where I always get stuck with an escalation clause. Should I just do a general?
Oh, that's a good one. I actually had notes on my desk that aren't in front of me that I had that question down.
Yeah.
So yes, that is one that I get with the escalation clause all of the time. So I suggest that if your client has an escalation clause, have this match the original offer, but then on the escalation, check off that there is an appraisal contingency, and then be clear. And you can even drop like a box somewhere on this and have your client sign it, that appraisal contingency form will be updated after escalation accepted.
Okay, because I had an agent give me a hard time because I did it based on what I wrote the offer at, and she was like, "Well, this isn't right. It's not right." I'm like, "Well, we would have to change it anyway if we escalate." We
Right.
Change both.
Right, because where that gets sticky is if your client can only do 15,000, then
Yeah.
And I've had some people that will actually put like a little like clause on, this, where like I have accepted ones on listings with escalation clause, and I actually thought it was pretty genius. And I was like,
Yeah.
way to go, person. Where they put down here, like, so say it was 15,000 gap and the purchase price was 350. So they put 335 here, but then down here put, if escalation addendum is used, buyer is willing to cover any $15,000 gap. And they just straight up spelled it out here.
Okay.
So that's another option that you can do.
Perfect.
I think eventually they should just change it to amount of gap instead of an actual number.
Yes.
But
And like you said, there
Oh,
should be
my-
a waiver and a contingency.
yes, yeah, a true waiver,
Yeah.
because this isn't a true waiver if you put something in, because where it gets mixed up is if the minimum appraisal value is met. So that's where if you have the 300,000, so now this paragraph is only if the minimum appraisal is met. And the reason that 2A makes no sense, or 2B, I'm sorry, makes no sense, if your client's technically waiving it because they're going to cover 50,000, but you leave one blank, you just voided it if it appraises short. So as a listing agent, look out for that. If they're like, no, we did section B, but it's left in appraised value, there's their out. You want them to put a number in there, and then if it's below that is where they have their right. So what the built-in technically for 2B is say, using the same example of purchase price of $350, and you put on there at 300,000, that automatically allows them to change the mortgage contingency box, whether it's changing the loan amount, changing the LTV. They don't have to go back and get anything signed or anything updated. It's automatically built in that they have the right to make changes to the agreement of sale, the mortgage contingency box, because it fell in between the purchase price and that number, but it doesn't give them the right to terminate, and it doesn't give them the right to renegotiate. Only outside of that minimum do they have the option to try to change the mortgage contingency. It doesn't even technically give them the right to terminate or renegotiate. But if you cannot make it work at that point, it voids this. This means nothing. If it comes in at 290, this paper goes out the window and it automatically just goes back to your mortgage contingency box. Did that confuse you guys anymore? Does that help a little bit? The paper still sucks.
Yeah.
No way around that.
Because both still says it can terminate.
So on
I lost an offer. Yeah. Because it does say on 2 that it can still be terminated. It's like null and void or something right there.
yeah,
It says
so
it's void.
no. That says the addendum is void, not the contract.
Right. That's what I
What-
mean. But that's
yeah,
void. So
But if it falls
why?
below that, because that's saying, so that's that line right there with the null and void is if it's 350,000, you put 300, it comes in at 290, this paper goes out the window and you only can work with the actual mortgage contingency box, which is your loan amount and your LTV. That's where that comes back if it's outside of these. So that's what I'm saying. If you do a number in there,
Number in there.
but if your
Okay.
client's really 100% waiving it, I would say make something separate that specifically says waiving for like any number, because this isn't clear enough with it.
Okay.
Would you submit that to and do another addendum or just the general?
I would just do the other
Yeah.
one.
General.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, you could, I think there's way too much marking up on like putting like any note, like we're just, I'm a cut and dry kind of person. I am. Straight shooter. Any other questions around this? Does it help?
How do we get it changed to form some?
So honestly,
Yeah.
can I answer that when we're not recording?
Mhm.
Okay, perfect, because I'm a straight shooter. But I also don't want to go to jail.
Dauphin County Jail.
Although, here's my rule of thumb, guys. If
Dauphin
you'll busy,
County.
if you guys ever get me arrested as a broker, the only thing I ask is let me sit for 2 days to have a vacation before you sell me out. That's all I ask. 3 meals, what? That I don't take care of? Please leave me for 2 days. Are we good on this to move on, or do you want me to go over it a little bit more? I am also going to like mark this up and send out an email of guidelines so you guys have it to refer back to before I answer
I saw
questions.
your initial email that you sent on this that I refer back to, and I still.
That one was pretty damn
I know.
color coordinated too. When they changed all 6 forms at the same
Yeah,
time.
Yeah.
God. All right. So our other big questions that we keep getting are the buyer's agency compensation. Do you guys want my true answer or my broker answer first?
Broker answer first.
True.
We had more with true answers. Nothing changed, guys. Get over it. Nothing changed. Stop posting shit on social media. Stop asking questions on social media, because all you're doing is drawing attention to it.
Yeah.
You know what changed? $1, not even $1, a penny. Before, you were allowed to put 1 penny as long as you were offering compensation in the MLS. It changed from a penny to 0. But now that agents are making this whole big stink about it, that, oh my God, they're allowed to offer 0. Now people are going to offer 0 because people didn't know before that it was allowed to be a penny. So nothing changed other than agents bringing light to it. And now yous are all shooting yourself in the foot because it's like, oh no, poor me. It was the same shit. Someone could have paid you $1 before. But this is half Heather answer, half broker answer, because it's not going to be nice. So more Heather answer. For the love of sweet baby Jesus, guys, stop leaving your buyer's agency contracts blank. You are not protecting yourself. You are working for free if it says 0 on the other end, and it has in there. And if you're putting seller cover, this is my favorite one. Seller covers. No, they don't. They don't have to. Never have, never will. They don't have to.
Wait, what's seller covered? I don't know.
So people will literally write in there, they'll leave it blank and then put seller covers compensation. Nope. But if you actually read the buyer's agency contract, again, reading 101, it's a beautiful thing, guys. It says it in there that the broker will accept compensation from the seller, but if the amount offered is less than what is listed above, the buyer is then responsible. It's already in there. That says if you put 2.5 on that line and someone's offering 0, you have the right to ask your buyer for 2.5%. But again, nothing has changed other than a penny went to 0. Now that I got that off my chest. What happens if there's a 0? Because we're going to see, in my opinion, my strong opinion, I think we're going to see a lot more people putting 0 now because they don't know how to negotiate. And it's like, well, I can do a listing for 2% now. You could have before too. You just weren't smart enough to figure it out, guys. So how do you get it so your buyer doesn't have to do it? There's a couple ways that you can go about it. I'm going to come back to that because this is going to make more sense from the listing agent side. From a listing agent side, if the agent comes or the seller says, well, somebody else offered to list my house for 2% and you're doing 5%. What I would tell them is, okay, if there's 2 houses for sale on the block or in the neighborhood, why is an agent going to try to sell your house? Why? The other house is probably going to have multiple offers because they're offering to pay the other agent. You're at a 0, so why do they have to do it? Most buyers can't afford to pay commission on top of the purchase the price. So you're actually hurting the chances of a higher sale amount because some agents, although we are not supposed to not show it, just won't. So wouldn't you rather be competitive rather than a 0? Or I'm going to be honest and say you're probably going to pay it anyway. So yes, that agent that's telling you they're going to list your house for 2.5%, you're probably going to have to pay seller's assist because they're going to try to negotiate in their commission. So you're going to end up paying it anyway. So why should we sit on the market for 30 days ready to pay somebody in their seller's assist rather than just put it out in the beginning of it? But from a buyer's agent standpoint, hold on, off to that. My ADD brain's going crazy. So if you're having that conversation with your seller, and I'm a big advocate on tell them out of this 5% or 6%, we're going to pay the buyer's agent X amount. That's where the lawsuits are stemming from, when people didn't know they were paying the buyer's agents, okay? Be open and honest. You pay one fee and it's this. And if they say, well, why do I have to pay that? Exactly how I just explained it to you is how you could explain it to them. If you have something better to explain to them, more power to you. Mine is just, why not? If enough agents don't change the practice that they're doing today and continue to pay a buyer's agent, in my opinion, it's eventually going to die down and it's going to be a thing that's unheard of again. Just like this all happened years ago when they changed from trend that had to put a minimum to bright that was a penny. There was an uproar then and it never changed. So I think if we don't draw attention to it, eventually it will go away. Could be wrong. I've been wrong once or twice in my life. Could be wrong, but I don't really see it happening. As a buyer's agent, when somebody says, If there's somebody that has 0 and 2.5% and your client wants to see that 0, don't make an excuse to not show the property. Don't say, oh, I tried to get in and they denied the appointment or blah, 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 blah. It'll come back to bite you in the ass. Be open and honest with your buyer. Hey, that contract that we signed up front, blame me. I don't care. My broker requires me to get paid for the transaction. Unfortunately, this seller is not paying. I'm more than happy to show you, but I do need to be upfront with you that you are going to have to pay 2.5% at closing to my broker. Are you okay with that? And if they say yes, show the house. Be open and honest. I can try to negotiate into the contract and try to get them the seller's assist so the seller pays it, but there's no guarantee. Do you still want to see the house? If they say yes, show the house. They sign the buyer's agency contracts. This is where all of these people for years that I heard that like, oh, I've been in the business for a couple of years and I've never done a buyer's agency contract. You might want to start a little bit until this blows over. Protect yourself. But don't leave it blank because then you just defeated the purpose of it. When I do compliance, guys, you guys are the reason I drink, okay? These compliance files and stuff that I see that people write in or just not protecting themselves. If you truly read it and understand the form, it's a lot easier to explain it to the buyer rather than leaving yourself open. Because if that's a 0 and there's 0 offer, what are you referring back to? Nothing. Now you just showed 38 houses and used 10 tanks of gas, and now you're negative. Other than just filling it out and being open and honest. What questions do we have around that?
Would you initially try to do the seller assist versus going to your buyer? Like,
Always.
instead of talking to your buyer first, try to.
No, you can't. You can't. You're at that point. You already showed the house, and your buyer fell in love with it. And then if they can't afford to pay you on it, now what? Now you're going to feel bad. So be open and honest from the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
Say, I'm going to try everything I can to get the seller to pay it. But if I cannot, this is what needs to happen. If you really think about it, all of these 0s out there are basically the same thing of working and negotiating with a for sale by owner, except they have an agent. And also maybe it's because I was a buyer's agent for 10 years. I know how hard buyer's agents work for their money. Think about that when you're a listing agent. How would you feel on the other side? And are you really doing your client what's in their best interest of putting a 0 in there, knowing that a lot of agents aren't going to bring their buyers through? In my humble opinion, no. Also, I had this question about a rental the other day where the compensation was a 0. I've been seeing dollars for compensations for years, so this is nothing new. One, ask the agent, are they willing to pay? Because this one, we went through it, and then here, it was an error, and they were paying it out. So sometimes it does happen, just because when you skip over it now in Bright, I believe it automatically dubs in. Is there like you have to put it in, where before it stopped you? I could be wrong on that because I tried to do it, and one it let me go past, and the other one it didn't. So it could have been me. I don't know. But so yeah, I was probably trunking. Absolutely, probably was. I was probably still here. It was probably still noon. So if anyone wants to join us after this class, no. God, it just can't over being recorded. It's fire. Yes. Anyway. It's the only reason she's here. No, just kidding. With the rental, what I suggested to this person was, they said, there's no way my client can pay an extra $1,000. And I said to them, ask your client if instead of $2,000, if they're willing to pay, it was a little less than $2,100 a month. And then negotiated, and my client will pay, I think it was like $2,075 a month. but I want your landlord to pay me my commission up front. So they're making it back. But make sure you put in for the first year,
Oh, yeah.
because after that, or you can put that the rent is $2,000, but the buyer will pay $2,075 until X date to recoup the money paid out for the commission. So that's another way around it. Okay. Any other questions?
I think you mentioned at one point that you were gonna put out an email like with the wording you want for like all of these clauses that we like to add in to the
I
agreement.
started that, and then I keep getting questions about more clauses, and it's just a never-ending
It's
form.
never ending.
But I'll put out some of them that are like do's, don'ts, please, hell no's.
Okay.
Okay, so I will try to figure out the best way to do it. Right now, it's just on like Google Docs that I just, every time I see one, I'm like, I swear to God, if you guys saw me like doing compliance, I'm that cat behind the keyboard. I'm like, don't put that. It's like I get so angry at 4 a.m. when I'm doing it. All my compliances are done in the morning, so when you get an influx of stuff in the morning, it's because I do compliance for 2 hours every morning. Any other questions? Did I help at all? Did I scare you away?
Little each.
Little of each? Then I did my job. All right, guys. Oh, hi. Questions at home? No? All right, this recording will.
Espérate, a ver si ya la veo.
I think she's speaking Spanish. All right,
O
guys.
tienes que mandarme la foto completa, ya sabes.
Have a
así,
good day.
con la mitad no, tengo que ver toda la página, punta, punta, punta.